Word spread quickly about Jesus of Nazareth, even reaching the household of a royal official serving in Capernaum. When his son fell near death, this man of considerable social standing made a 20-mile journey to find Jesus, setting aside every advantage of rank and position, and begged him to come and heal his dying child. Jesus' response was startling. He did not travel to Capernaum. He simply said, "Go, your son will live." The official believed those words and left. On the return journey, his servants met him with news that the boy had recovered. He asked what hour the fever broke. It was the exact moment Jesus had spoken. No touch, no presence, no ritual, just a word, effective across 20 miles. Jesus' authority was not limited by distance.
The synagogue in Capernaum was packed. Jesus was teaching, and the people were astonished, because he taught as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law who debated endlessly among themselves. Then a man with an impure spirit cried out from within the crowd, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus commanded it, "Be quiet, come out of him." The spirit shook the man violently and came out with a shriek. The crowd was stunned. A new teaching with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits, and they obey. The demon knew who Jesus was before any human in that room had figured it out. This was not the beginning of a theological debate. It was a declaration of war.
After the synagogue service, Jesus walked to the home of Simon Peter and Andrew. There he found Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a severe fever. Luke, writing as a physician, calls it a high fever, a clinical distinction that tells us this was life-threatening. Jesus went to her, took her hand, and rebuked the fever. Immediately it left. She got up and began to serve them. Two things mark this miracle. First, its intimacy. Jesus healed in a private home, not a public stage. Second, its immediate result. She did not need days of recovery. She rose and served. Every healing Jesus performed returned people not just to health, but to purpose. Simon Peter had fished the Sea of Galilee his entire life. He knew its rhythms. Nighttime was the time to fish, when the cool water brought the catch to the surface. They had worked all night and caught nothing. Then Jesus, teaching from Peter's boat, finished speaking and said, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets." Peter's response contains everything essential about faith. "Master," he said, "we have worked hard all night and caught nothing, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." What followed was a catch so enormous the nets began to tear, and 2 boats began to sink. Peter fell to his knees. "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." Jesus said, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." The overwhelming abundance was a preview. Jesus had entered Peter's world to call him out of it. No figure in first-century Palestine was more isolated than a person with leprosy. By Mosaic law, they were required to live outside the community, cover their mouths, and warn approaching strangers with the cry, "Unclean, unclean." They were socially dead, untouchable. When one such man fell before Jesus and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean," Jesus did something no one expected. Before he spoke a single word of healing, he reached out and touched him. Under Jewish law, anyone who touched a leper became ceremonially unclean. But when Jesus touched this man, the flow of contamination reversed. Instead of Jesus becoming unclean, the man became clean. His holiness was more powerful than the disease. And with 2 words, the 12 years of exile ended. Be clean. There are acts of faith that are physically inconvenient, socially disruptive, and financially costly. 4 men carried their paralyzed friend to a house where Jesus was teaching. The crowd was too dense to enter, so they climbed to the roof, broke through it, and lowered the man on his sleeping mat directly in front of Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." The Pharisees immediately recognized the claim. Only God can forgive sins. Their logic was correct. Their error was refusing to consider who was standing in front of them. Jesus then said, "So that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he told the paralyzed man to get up, take his mat, and walk. The man did. What was invisible and unverifiable the forgiveness of sin, was proven by what was visible and undeniable. The two were connected by design. Near the sheep gate in Jerusalem lay a pool called Bethesda, surrounded by 5 covered colonnades, where the sick, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed waited. One man had been in this condition for 38 years. Archaeologists have confirmed this pool's existence exactly as John described it. Jesus found this man and asked him a strange question: "Do you want to get well?" The man did not answer yes. He explained his obstacles. He had no one to help him reach the water in time. He had been bypassed for 38 years. Jesus said, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." The man was immediately cured. Later, Jesus found him again and said, "Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The physical restoration was real, but it came with a call to a completely different kind of life. There was a man in the synagogue with a shriveled hand. The Pharisees watched Jesus closely, waiting to see if he would heal on the Sabbath so they could build a charge against him. Jesus looked at them and asked, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" They were silent. He looked around at them in anger. The scripture says he was deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. Then he told the man to stretch out his hand. The hand was completely restored. The Pharisees walked out and immediately began plotting how to have him killed. The Sabbath had been given to Israel for human flourishing, not human suffering. Jesus had said it plainly. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In choosing their interpretation of the law over a man sitting before them, they had revealed what they truly valued. A Roman centurion commanded approximately 80 soldiers. He was a man whose word was law within his unit. When his servant fell gravely ill, this Gentile military officer sent Jewish elders to ask Jesus for help. The elders pleaded on his behalf. "He deserves this," they said, "for he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." As Jesus approached, the centurion sent a second message: "Lord, do not trouble yourself. I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. But just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority. I tell this one, do this, and he does it." Jesus was amazed. This is not a common word in the Gospels. He turned to the crowd. "I have not found such great faith even in Israel." When the messengers returned home, they found the servant well. The greatest faith Jesus encountered in his entire ministry came from a Roman military officer, a Gentile outsider. As Jesus approached the town of Nain, he encountered a funeral procession coming the other direction. A widow's only son was being carried out to burial. In first-century Palestine, a widow who lost her only son had lost everything: her legal protection, her economic security, her future. Jesus was not asked to do anything. He had not been sent for. He was simply walking toward the town when he saw this woman, and the text says his heart went out to her. "Don't cry," he said. He went and touched the funeral stretcher, something that under Jewish law would render him ritually unclean. He spoke to the dead young man as if he could hear. "I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to speak. Jesus gave him back to his mother. The crowd understood immediately. "A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." The Sea of Galilee sits nearly 700 feet below sea level, surrounded by hills that create natural wind tunnels. Sudden, violent storms are a documented feature of this body of water. When one struck while the disciples crossed at night, even the professional fishermen in the boat were genuinely afraid. Jesus was asleep. They woke him. "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He got up and rebuked the winds and the waves. It became completely calm. The disciples were terrified, not relieved, terrified. They turned to each other and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." They were asking the right question. In the Old Testament, only one being commanded the sea. Psalm 107 says, "God stilled the storm to a whisper and hushed the waves of the sea." What they had just watched Jesus do was something the Hebrew Scriptures attributed exclusively to God. Across the water in Gentile territory, Jesus stepped ashore and was immediately met by a man from the tombs. He was naked, violent, unchainable, living among the dead, cutting himself with stones. He ran and fell before Jesus. The demon inside him cried out,
"What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Jesus asked the demon's name. "Legion," it said, "because we are many." Roman soldiers knew a legion as a force of thousands. The combined power of that many spiritual forces was less than nothing before Jesus. He cast them out. When the local people found the man, he was sitting quietly, dressed, in his right mind. They were afraid and begged Jesus to leave. The healed man begged to come with Jesus. Instead, Jesus sent him back. "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you." In Gentile territory, Jesus left behind his first missionary.
She had been hemorrhaging for 12 years. Under Jewish law, this condition made her ceremonially unclean, and anyone she touched became unclean. She had spent everything she had on physicians and grown worse, not better. When she heard Jesus was passing through, she pressed into the crowd and touched the edge of his prayer shawl from behind. Immediately, her bleeding stopped. She had reached specifically for the kraspedon, the corner of his garment where the sacred tassels of a Jewish man's prayer shawl were attached. Jesus immediately felt power had gone out from him. "Who touched me?" he asked. The disciples thought it was an absurd question in a pressing crowd, but he kept looking. The woman came, trembling, fell at his feet, and told him everything. "Daughter," he said, the most tender word he could have chosen, "your faith has healed you." After 12 years of isolation, she received her dignity back, publicly, from Jesus himself.
A ruler of the synagogue named Jairus had crossed every social barrier to fall at Jesus' feet in public. His 12-year-old daughter was dying. Jesus went with him. On the way, messengers arrived. "Your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore." Jesus told Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe." At the house, professional mourners were already wailing. Jesus said, "She is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him. He took her parents and Peter, James, and John and went in. He took the girl's hand and said 2 words in Aramaic, "Talitha koum." "Little girl, I say to you, get up." She stood and walked. Jesus' first instruction was for someone to give her something to eat. The miracle returned her not to drama, but to ordinary life. Jairus' daughter was 12 years old. The woman with the hemorrhage had suffered for 12 years. Both were daughters. Both were restored.
2 blind men followed Jesus through the streets of Capernaum, calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." Son of David was a messianic title. These blind men were making a theological declaration. They were saying they believed who Jesus was even before they could see him. Jesus turned and asked them directly, "Do you believe I am able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they said. He touched their eyes. "According to your faith, let it be done to you." Their sight was restored. Isaiah had written 7 centuries earlier that when the Messianic age arrived, the eyes of the blind would be opened. In Matthew's Gospel, these healings of the blind are not coincidental. Every time a blind person receives sight, it is a fulfillment of that specific prophecy, a living announcement that the one Isaiah described had arrived.
When Jesus saw the thousands who had followed him to a desolate hillside near Bethsaida, the text says he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples urged him to send the crowd away to find food. "You give them something to eat," he said. They had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Jesus had the crowd, numbering more than 5,000 men, plus women and children, sit in groups on the grass. He took the bread, looked up to heaven, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to the disciples to distribute. Everyone ate and was satisfied. They collected 12 baskets of leftovers, 1 for each tribe of Israel. This is the only miracle recorded in all 4 Gospels. The actions Jesus performed over the food, took, gave thanks, broke, and gave, are precisely the 4 actions he will perform at the Last Supper. This feeding in the wilderness was a preview of the meal that will define his death and its meaning. After feeding the 5,000, Jesus sent the disciples ahead by boat and went up a mountain alone to pray. At 3 in the morning, the disciples' boat was being battered by waves. Jesus came to them, walking on the water. They thought he was a ghost and cried out in fear. He said, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." The Greek phrase he used, ego eimi, I am, is the exact phrase God used when speaking to Moses at the burning bush. It is the divine name. Peter called out, "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus said. Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. When he noticed the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. "Lord, save me." Jesus reached out immediately. "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they climbed into the boat, the wind died. Those in the boat worshipped him. "Truly, you are the Son of God."
Jesus traveled into the region of Tyre and Sidon, Gentile territory, seeking solitude. He did not find it. A Canaanite woman found him and cried out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is severely tormented by a demon." Jesus initially did not respond. The disciples urged him to send her away. He told her he was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. She knelt before him. "Lord, help me." He said, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Her response did not argue against the metaphor. She accepted it and redirected it. "Yes, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Jesus answered, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." Her daughter was healed that very hour. The same phrase, great faith, is used only twice in the Gospels, once for the Roman centurion, once for this Canaanite woman. Both were Gentiles, both outsiders, both received what the insiders missed.
In the Decapolis, a Gentile region, people brought Jesus a man who was deaf and could barely speak. Jesus took him aside privately, away from the crowd. He put his fingers in the man's ears. He spat and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and sighed. Then he said in Aramaic, "Ephatha, be opened." At that moment, the man's ears were opened, and his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Isaiah 7 centuries earlier had written, "Then the ears of the deaf will be unstopped, and the mute tongue will shout for joy." One by one, the specific signs of the Messianic age that Isaiah had listed were being fulfilled. Jesus healed this man, not once, not at a distance, but with gentle physical contact, entering his world of silence as fully as possible before restoring him to sound.
3 days in a remote area had passed without food. The crowd that followed Jesus numbered 4,000 men, not counting women and children. Jesus said, "I have compassion for these people. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse." 7 loaves and a few small fish produced enough food for all of them, with 7 basketfuls of pieces left over. The first feeding miracle had occurred on Jewish soil for 5,000 people, with 12 baskets remaining, 1 for each tribe of Israel. This second feeding miracle occurred in Gentile territory, the Decapolis, with 7 baskets remaining. 7 is the number of completion in Hebrew symbolism. What God had done for Israel in the wilderness with manna, Jesus was now doing for the nations. The blessings of the kingdom were not for one people alone. At Bethsaida, Jesus encountered a blind man. He took him by the hand and led him outside the village. He spit on the man's eyes and placed his hands on him. "Do you see anything?" The man looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes a second time. The man's sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. This is the only miracle in the Gospels that happened in 2 stages. Mark places it in his Gospel immediately before Peter's confession of Jesus as the Messiah. Like this man, the disciples could see, but not yet fully. Their understanding was real, but incomplete. A first touch had given them the shape of things. A second touch would one day bring full clarity. The blind man who saw trees walking is a portrait of every person whose understanding of Jesus is still coming into focus.
6 days after Peter declared that Jesus was the Messiah, Jesus took Peter, James, and John up a high mountain. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light. Moses appeared, representing the law. Elijah appeared, representing the prophets. Both had met God on mountains. Both had mysterious departures from this world. Here they stood with Jesus on a mountain, and they talked with him. A bright cloud covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." The disciples fell face down in terror. Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw only Jesus. The transfiguration was a brief lifting of the veil. What the disciples saw had always been true. They were given eyes to see it for a moment on that mountain.
At the base of the mountain of the Transfiguration, a scene of chaos awaited. A desperately ill boy, seized by a demon since childhood, thrown into fire and water, convulsing and foaming at the mouth. His father had brought him to the 9 remaining disciples, who had tried and failed to cast the demon out. Jesus rebuked them, "You unbelieving and perverse generation." Then the father turned to him. "If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," Jesus said, "everything is possible for one who believes." The father replied immediately, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." These words were not a statement of strong faith. They were an honest confession from the intersection of believing and doubting. Jesus healed the boy in response to that honesty. When the disciples asked later why they had failed, Jesus said, "This kind comes out only by prayer." Some spiritual realities demand a depth that cannot be faked.
When the temple tax collectors came to Peter and asked whether Jesus paid the required annual tax, Jesus had an unexpected solution. "Go to the lake," he told Peter. "Throw out your line and take the first fish you catch. Open its mouth, and you will find a 4-drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." Matthew records the instruction, not the outcome, because the point was in the instruction itself. Jesus had foreknowledge of a specific coin inside a specific fish in a specific lake. Providence is not limited to large events and historic turning points. The God who holds the cattle on 1,000 hills also knows what is in the mouth of a single fish in the Sea of Galilee. Nothing in creation falls outside his awareness or his reach. The disciples asked a theological question: who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus rejected both options. "Neither," he said. "This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him." He knelt on the ground, mixed clay from his own spit, and spread it on the man's eyes. "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." The man went, washed, and came back seeing. What followed was a long, chaotic interrogation by the Pharisees, who could not accept the reality of the miracle. They questioned the healed man twice. They questioned his parents. They finally kicked him out of the synagogue. When Jesus heard, he found the man and asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. John uses an entire chapter to show the contrast between 2 kinds of blindness: the physical blindness that was cured and the spiritual blindness of the Pharisees that was confirmed.
There was a woman in the synagogue who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. Jesus called her forward and said, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." He placed his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. The synagogue ruler was indignant. "There are 6 days for work," he said. "Come and be healed on those days, not the Sabbath." Jesus answered, "You hypocrites! Doesn't each of you untie your ox or donkey on the Sabbath and lead it out for water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day?" His opponents were humiliated. The word he used, daughter of Abraham, restored her full identity as a member of God's covenant people before anything else. And the Sabbath, he argued, was the most appropriate day of all to undo 18 years of bondage.
Jesus was invited to dine at the home of a prominent Pharisee on the Sabbath. The guests were watching him closely. A man who suffered from abnormal fluid retention appeared before him. Jesus asked the Pharisees and legal experts directly, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" They had nothing to say. He healed the man and sent him away. Then he turned the argument back on them. "If your son or your ox falls into a pit on the Sabbath, which of you would not pull it out immediately?" Again, they had nothing to say. The same silence. They were not speechless because they lacked theological arguments. They were speechless because their arguments could not survive contact with compassion for the human being standing in front of them. Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha, had been in the tomb for 4 days when Jesus finally arrived in Bethany.
Jewish tradition held that a spirit lingered near the body for 3 days. 4 days was not accidental, it was deliberate. By the 4th day, there was no ambiguity. He was dead. Martha met Jesus on the road. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." She thought he meant the final resurrection. "I am the resurrection and the life," Jesus said. "The one who believes in me will live even though they die." When Mary reached him, she fell at his feet weeping. The crowd with her was weeping, and Jesus wept. The shortest verse in all of Scripture. He wept not because he did not know what was about to happen. He wept because death itself and the grief it produces genuinely moved him even as he was preparing to end it. He commanded Lazarus, "Come out," and the dead man walked out of the tomb. On the road between Samaria and Galilee, 10 men with leprosy approached Jesus from a distance, calling out, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." He told them to go and show themselves to the priests. As they went, they were cleansed. One of them, seeing that he was healed, came back immediately, threw himself at Jesus' feet, and praised God with a loud voice. He was a Samaritan. Jesus responded with 3 questions. Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? He told the Samaritan, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." 10 were physically healed. 1 returned in gratitude, and that one received something the other 9 did not: a personal relationship, a word of affirmation, and a wellness that went deeper than the skin.
Bartimaeus sat by the road outside Jericho, blind and begging. He was the last person Jesus would heal before entering Jerusalem for the final time. When he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." The crowd told him to be quiet. He shouted all the louder. Jesus stopped. "Call him," he said. The crowd changed completely. "Cheer up, on your feet, he is calling you." Bartimaeus threw aside his cloak, the tool of his trade that he spread on the ground to catch coins, and jumped to his feet. He left the instruments of his former life before the healing had even occurred. Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Rabbi, I want to see." "Receive your sight," Jesus said. "Your faith has healed you." Bartimaeus immediately received his sight and followed Jesus along the road toward Jerusalem. On the road toward Jerusalem, Jesus saw a fig tree in full leaf and went to look for fruit. He found none. He said, "May you never bear fruit again." The tree withered immediately, overnight. When the disciples saw it the next morning, they were astonished. Jesus used the moment to teach about faith moving mountains. But the cursed fig tree was also something else. In the Hebrew scriptures, the fig tree was a recurring symbol of Israel. The day before, Jesus had cleansed the temple, overturning the money changers' tables and calling the religious leaders thieves. The fig tree, full of leaves but bearing no fruit, was a symbol of the same reality: religious activity without genuine transformation. The judgment on the tree was a visual parable about the institution Jesus had just confronted, one that had all the appearance of religion and none of its fruit.
In the darkness of the Garden of Gethsemane, as torches flickered and soldiers arrived to arrest Jesus, one of the disciples drew a sword and struck the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. Jesus immediately said, "No more of this." He reached out and touched the man's ear and healed him. This was the last miracle Jesus performed before the cross. He healed an enemy in the moment of his own betrayal and arrest. He refused to let his followers defend him with violence. And even in the final seconds before the suffering began, the nature that had healed the sick and raised the dead was unchanged. The last earthly act of his healing ministry was for someone standing on the other side of the sword.
On the 3rd day after his crucifixion, the stone was rolled away and the tomb was empty. The grave linens were neatly folded inside. An angel told the women who had come at dawn, "He is not here, he has risen, just as he said." Over the following 40 days, Jesus appeared to Mary Magdalene, to Peter alone, to 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, to 10 disciples, to 11 disciples, to more than 500 people at once,
to his brother James, and finally to all of the apostles before his ascension. The disciples who proclaimed the resurrection did not claim that Jesus lived on spiritually or that he existed in memory. They insisted they had seen him, touched him, eaten with him. They held this claim not as a preference or a tradition, but as a fact, and they died refusing to recant it. Paul wrote, "If Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile." The resurrection is not one doctrine among many. It is the foundation on which every other claim depends.
After the resurrection, several disciples returned to what they knew, fishing on the Sea of Galilee. They fished all night and caught nothing. At dawn, a figure stood on the shore and called out, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No." "Throw your net on the right side." They could not haul in the net, there were so many fish. John said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Peter threw himself into the water. When they came ashore, Jesus had bread and fish already cooking over a fire. "Come and have breakfast," he said. No one asked who he was. They knew. After they ate, Jesus turned to Peter, who had denied him 3 times, and asked 3 times, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" 3 questions for 3 denials. "Feed my sheep," Jesus said. The second miraculous catch of fish had restored what the first had promised. And Peter, who had walked on water and then sunk, who had declared Jesus the Messiah and then denied him in a courtyard, was not discarded. He was recommissioned.